The United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, has reportedly been called back to Washington for urgent discussions after unexpectedly cancelling a major speaking engagement in Ottawa. And the timing of this development is drawing major attention, because it comes at a moment when the Trump administration's tariff strategy is facing growing political, legal, and economic challenges on multiple fronts. For months, Donald Trump and his allies promoted tariffs as a powerful tool that would strengthen America's negotiating position and pressure trading partners, including Canada, into making concessions. The White House repeatedly projected confidence, arguing that the United States held the advantage in these economic disputes. But now the situation appears far more complicated. Legal pushback, international resistance, market uncertainty, and growing diplomatic tensions are creating pressure around a strategy that was once presented as unstoppable. And that is why this moment is becoming politically significant. For much of the dispute, Washington projected strength while increasing pressure on Ottawa through trade threats and aggressive rhetoric. However, recent developments are fueling speculation that the administration may now be reassessing parts of its approach behind closed doors. If that shift continues, it could mark an important turning point in the future of US-Canada relations and reshape the broader conversation around trade, diplomacy, and economic strategy moving forward. If you want fact-driven analysis on the political and economic forces reshaping Canada's future, subscribe to the Canada News.
Thanks for joining us here on CTV News Channel. I'm Renee Rogers. We begin with breaking news we're following. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra has canceled a planned speaking appearance in Ottawa as he has been called back to Washington. This news comes just over 1 hour before Hoekstra was scheduled to be a featured speaker at the 2026 Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference in Ottawa. Organizers say he was called back to D.C. for urgent meetings. With me now is CTV News U.S. political analyst.
The latest pressure surrounding the Trump administration's trade strategy appears to stem from major legal challenges to several key tariffs. According to political analysts, court rulings questioning the legality and constitutionality of some tariff measures have significantly complicated the White House's economic strategy and reduced some of its negotiating leverage. Politically, this is a major development because tariffs were presented by Donald Trump as a central tool of international economic pressure. The broader strategy relied heavily on using tariffs to push trading partners into negotiations, apply pressure on allies, and strengthen America's bargaining position in global trade disputes. For a period of time, many countries were cautious about escalating tensions with the United States because of America's enormous economic influence. However, over time, some governments began adapting to that pressure rather than immediately backing down. This is where Mark Carney became an increasingly important figure in the broader debate. Rather than simply criticizing Trump's trade approach, Carney and Canadian officials focused on presenting Canada as a stable, rules-based economic partner, while framing unpredictable trade disputes as harmful to long-term global economic confidence. That shift in messaging became politically significant because it challenged the perception that economic pressure alone would automatically force allies into compliance. Canada publicly pushed back, expanded international partnerships, and positioned itself as supporting stability and cooperation during a period of growing uncertainty. Now, as legal challenges, diplomatic tensions, and economic concerns continue to grow around the tariff strategy, analysts in both Canada and the United States are increasingly debating whether Washington may need to reassess parts of its approach. For months, the dominant narrative coming from the White House was that the United States held overwhelming leverage in future trade negotiations, including discussions surrounding the USMCA framework. But recent developments, including legal setbacks and urgent diplomatic discussions, are raising new questions about how much leverage either side truly holds in such a deeply interconnected economic relationship. And that may ultimately be the most important takeaway from this moment. The economic relationship between Canada and the United States is far more interconnected and mutually dependent than political rhetoric sometimes suggests.
And so I think what we're seeing here right now is this could possibly be the White House trying to figure out a response as we move into, of course, the CUSMA review and President Donald Trump pressing Europe on an agreement on trade as well.
Could this signal more tension to do with those upcoming CUSMA talks?
I don't know if it signals more tension. I think what it could be is the White House is now desperately looking for leverage. Remember, we got an alleged handshake deal with Europe that appears to not be moving in the direction that the president wants. Now all of his tariffs have been deemed, or most of them have been deemed unconstitutional, which leaves him very little leverage and maneuverability. And so right now, I think what we're seeing here is this could just possibly be what is the way forward, particularly for this administration, when already their hands are tied on so many other issues.
This is where the situation becomes even more politically challenging for Donald Trump, because the White House now appears to be facing pressure on several fronts at the same time. First, there are growing legal challenges, with courts questioning or limiting parts of the administration's tariff authority. Second, there are diplomatic difficulties, as more countries are showing a willingness to push back rather than immediately adjusting to American pressure. And third, there is increasing political pressure at home, as economic uncertainty and debate over trade policy continue to shape public opinion. Taken together, these developments create a far more complicated environment for the administration. That is especially significant because tariffs were never viewed only as economic tools. They were also closely tied to Trump's broader political messaging around strength, leverage, and negotiating power. However, when legal setbacks emerge, allies openly resist, and international narratives begin shifting, that image of unquestioned dominance becomes harder to maintain. And politically, that could create additional challenges as future trade debates and political battles continue to unfold.
I think right now, the courts have basically stripped the president of any power on the tools that he has been able to use to threaten and to bully and to gain leverage in talks. And so now they have to figure out what the next step is. I thought it was very surprising that in the face of this ruling, we did not get a response, and we still have not from the White House. And so I think what they're doing right now is scrambling to try to figure out how do they, in fact, move forward. And to say nothing of the fact that what this means domestically for the president, who is seeing his approval ratings continue to crater as he looks ahead to the midterm elections, where it's looking more and more likely like his party will suffer a massive.
Some people may look at this situation and say that ambassadors frequently return to Washington for meetings, and that is true. But context, timing, and political circumstances matter. Pete Hoekstra was scheduled to appear publicly in Ottawa before suddenly cancelling and returning to Washington for urgent discussions at the exact moment the Trump administration's tariff strategy is facing growing legal and international pressure. That timing is what makes the situation politically significant. It suggests the White House may be reassessing its strategy during a period of increasing uncertainty surrounding trade policy, legal challenges, and diplomatic tensions. The administration now appears caught in a difficult position. Escalating tensions further could increase international criticism and economic uncertainty, while stepping back after months of aggressive rhetoric could create political pressure domestically. That balancing act is becoming harder as global resistance to tariffs continues to grow. One of the major miscalculations critics point to is the assumption that Canada would eventually back down under economic pressure. Instead, Canada adapted. Canadian leaders expanded international relationships, diversified economic partnerships, and publicly emphasized long-term stability and resilience. At the same time, public debate inside Canada increasingly shifted toward concerns about unpredictability in the US-Canada relationship. And that shift matters because, historically, the foundation of the Canada-US relationship was not built primarily on pressure or fear, but on trust, cooperation, and deep economic integration. As trust becomes strained, the effectiveness of economic pressure alone becomes more limited. What we are seeing now goes beyond a dispute over tariffs. The broader debate is increasingly about the credibility, stability, and long-term effectiveness of America's approach to global economic leadership. For years, Donald Trump presented tariffs as a demonstration of strength and leverage. But as courts, international allies, financial markets, and trading partners all begin challenging aspects of that strategy simultaneously, the global perception of American influence becomes more complicated. And politically, that creates risks far beyond Canada. Because when one close ally successfully resists pressure, other countries may begin reconsidering how they respond as well. That is why this moment carries broader geopolitical implications. Analysts have also noted the relatively limited public response from the White House following recent legal setbacks. In Washington, silence during periods of major political pressure often fuels speculation about internal strategy discussions, reassessments, and damage control efforts happening behind closed doors. Which brings attention back to why Hoekstra's sudden return to Washington has generated so much interest. It may reflect an administration trying to determine its next move as one of its central trade strategies faces mounting legal, diplomatic, and political complications. Ultimately, this situation is no longer just about tariffs. It is about how economic power, diplomacy, and political credibility interact during a period of growing global uncertainty. And as Canada continues pushing back more openly while expanding its international partnerships, the broader balance within the US-Canada relationship may be entering a new phase. If you want deeper analysis on the political and economic developments shaping Canada's future and its relationship with the United States, subscribe to the Canada News and stay informed on the stories that matter most.